Hey guys, it's a couple of weeks before we're going to be meeting the first time at Easter weekend, and we have with us here Dave Mathisen, who's going to be joining us the following weekend, Earth Day weekend, the 22nd through the 24th. And Randall and him are going to have a little conversation about what they're going to cover Earth Day weekend. Can you take it from there, David?
Well, I'll defer to Randall. Randall, you start off.
Okay.
Then I'll jump in.
Okay, well, the first thing I got to say then is that, the golden section, the golden ratio, which is about the most harmonic proportion in all of mathematics, right? And so that's kind of one of the, to me, guiding ideas of what we're reaching for in this particular conference that we're going to have, is seeking the geometrical basis of how we could establish greater harmony in the world today. And on that note, if we look at Robert up there, Robert, now in terms of good harmonic proportioning, if you were to draw a vertical line axis through your face there, your eyes should be at the golden section.
Okay.
Got it from the top of your screen to the bottom of your screen.
So up further.
Yeah, think yourself roughly 6/10 of the way up. Now you're a little too high.
Too high.
Eventually you'll get the hang. That's about right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Now we can proceed, because that was disrupting my endocrine system. So yeah, we're gonna Dave and I think we're gonna try to bring our work together around the idea of what's happening in the cosmic realm and how the earth and the sky relate to each other, and how the memory of that relationship has been handed down through the generations, through the ages. And now we're at a very unique point where so much of the ancient knowledge and the ancient wisdom, the ancient science can be recovered, and we can begin reassembling all the pieces that have come apart over the millennia. And what Dave is doing is profoundly interesting and important, because he's showing that there was a template, and it was a universal template. Am I right, David?
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Randall, but
that's
you're
how I'm
absolutely
interpreting what you're doing.
I appreciate the way you said it, and it is profound. It's like an ancient treasure. I believe that Aristotle somewhere said this is the ancient treasure, and it's this treasure that's been given to every culture around the world in the ancient myths and the sacred stories and the ancient scriptures. They are all part of a unified system, and I can show that in
a unified
we can
system.
Talk about that.
And, and he can show it. Now, Robert, I don't know how much of Dave's work you've seen, but yeah, he definitely shows it. And he shows it two ways. He uses digital medium to present the information in a very succinct way. And then he takes us out under the canopy of stars so that we can transfer what we've seen, digitally, what we've seen within the form of the lecture, of a presentation, and we can project that onto the real cosmic sphere. And it's very powerful stuff. And I'm really looking forward to doing it again and really trying to master. Of course, I won't have time to catch up to you, Dave, in your mastery of this knowledge. But if I can get halfway or 3/4 of the way there, I will have lived a satisfied life for the most part. I have known intuitively,
too kind, Randall.
I have known intuitively, Dave, since I was a boy out there in rural Minnesota, where you could see the night sky with just incredible brilliancy, that somehow the fate of everything had to do with that vault of the heavens.
Well, and we can show it. This is not just a assertion that isn't backed up by anything. We can see it. It's
right there,
clear. And I'm not the first person, I hasten to add, to explore this subject. There are records of people who have suspected this or written about this or analyzed this going all the way back to Plato, and probably much earlier than that. But I can show a place where Plato talks about it in one of his dialogues, and there's been more recent, but I really did get obsessed by it and want to and wanted to. So for the past 12 plus years, I've been deciphering this system that can be seen connecting the sacred stories that are in the Bible to the sacred stories of the nations of the Americas, to the Greek myths that are pretty familiar to a lot of people, but also the myths of ancient India that are still very familiar to the people of India, the Mahabharata. Those stories and all those battles can be shown to be based on the stars, just like the Iliad in ancient Greece, the ancient Egyptian, the cultures of Africa, the cultures of Australia, ancient China, Norse myths. They are all using a unified system. And I'll show a little bit of what I mean, because it sounds exciting, but sometimes people nod their heads and say, yeah, that sounds good, but what exactly are you talking about? They're all based on the stars, and I'll show you what that means just
No,
briefly.
give us a little sample.
Right on. Well, let me share my screen then. I've got just a brief. When I say the world's ancient myths are based on the stars, what I'm asserting is that the characters in those stories, the figures in the myths, whether it's the Greek myths, the Norse myths, the myths of ancient Mesopotamia like Gilgamesh, the stories in the Bible, those characters and the events can be tied directly to specific constellations and heavenly cycles. And it's an esoteric language. Those constellations are marking a place on the cycle that has significance within this kind of language that they're using. So let me just show really quickly a couple of examples of what I mean when I say the characters are based on the stars. I'll just show really quickly, starting with Genesis, a story that most people are familiar with, Adam and Eve getting thrown out of the Garden of Eden after Eve takes the fruit and then she gives it to Adam. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but there's a series of throwing out of the garden by the Almighty. First, he throws out the serpent. He says, serpent, you're going to crawl on the ground and eat dust. I can show that in the sky. Obviously, all the constellations sink down into the west. But then he turns to the woman and he says, your pain in childbirth is going to be greatly increased. And so I'm just going to show you, this is like a super shortened version, but this is the constellation Virgo. She plays a lot of female figures in the myths. What's interesting is all the different constellations play both male figures and female figures from time to time. It's like actors. There's only so many actors, and they play different roles in different stories and put on different costumes. Virgo is often a female figure, of course. It's a virgin, but sometimes it's a male figure. Same with even the constellation of Hercules, which is this powerful looking, menacing figure, will sometimes play a female figure too, but most often a male figure. But they play lots of different roles. Anyway, Virgo, look how she's going across the sky. It appears that she's going across the sky on her back with her legs elevated and raised, which is the position of a woman giving birth. And so in many stories, she is envisioned as giving birth. It's also the position of a woman having sex. And so in many stories, she's doing that too. The myths are not bashful about using all kinds of metaphors, but I just want to show, it talks about pain of childbirth being greatly increased. This is an indicator that we might be talking about Virgo. And then we've got some more evidence that shows for sure we're talking about Virgo when the next passages say, and I will put enmity between, talking to the serpent now, thy seed, or I'll put enmity between you and the woman, talking to the serpent that God has just thrown out of the garden, and between your offspring and her offspring. So I'm going to show the offspring of the woman. If we're using the stars of the heavens, who could Virgo be giving birth to? What constellation might be envisioned as Virgo giving birth to that constellation? Well, there's a few candidates, but one, it's a pretty big baby, but this constellation Ophiuchus is an extremely important pivotal figure in the sky. I'm just going to outline, can you see how Ophiuchus could be envisioned as the seed of the woman or the offspring of the woman? And what we have in Genesis 3:15 is this prophecy where God, after throwing out the serpent, says, I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and it shall crush your head, but you shall bruise his heel. This is in Genesis 3:15, and it's sometimes called the proto-gospel because some theologians like to say, oh, this must be about Jesus being crucified, and the offspring of the serpent is bruising him, but he's crushing Satan on the cross. Okay, this is all can be shown to be celestial metaphor. Here's the seed of the woman, and directly below Ophiuchus is another very important constellation, the constellation Scorpio, which I know it's a scorpion, but it actually plays a serpent in many different myths. Sometimes a serpent with multiple heads rather than a Scorpio with two pincers. Those stars in the pincers can be 7 heads, 8 heads, even 9 heads, if you think about the story of Hercules fighting against the Hydra. But look at the positioning of the foot. I'm just pointing out that one verse to show how this is, I'm not using any pictures, I'm just using the verse. You shall bruise his head, but it shall bruise your heel. So right there you can see, I mean, it's like this, the scorpion is biting the heel of Ophiuchus, but Ophiuchus is standing on the head of the scorpion. So that's just a taste. I mean, I could go on and on about the stories of the Bible. That's from the very beginning of Genesis, but I just want to show jumping all the way to the Revelation at the very end, and we could argue about the way the Bible is organized, but at the very end of the Bible, you do have this dragon with 12 heads waiting to snatch up the baby that's born, the woman in travail. It's in Revelation 12. I think I have it right here. Just pull it open so I don't make a mistake on any of the numbers. Yeah, Revelation chapter 12, there's this, a wonder appears in the heavens, and then there's a great red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns, waiting to devour the child as soon as it's born. And you can see Scorpio there crouching as if it's waiting to devour the child that Virgo is going to have as soon as it's born. But then later in the same chapter, Revelation 12, you've got Michael, the archangel, leading his host of angels, his army of angels, to defeat that dragon, and it actually calls the dragon Satan. And I know, Randall, I've seen some of your videos where you show pictures of, the symbology of, a figure standing on a dragon or spearing a dragon. And if you look again at Ophiuchus standing on Scorpio, Michael is always depicted as standing on a demonic or diabolical figure there. Sometimes that figure does have multiple heads. In this picture, I think this is from the 1300s. I think it only has 1 head, but look at the spear. Can you see how Ophiuchus figures can often be envisioned as carrying a spear? If you draw a line through those stars in a straight line, it goes right down towards Scorpio. And here's the clincher. Michael is often depicted carrying in one hand a spear. Sometimes it's a sword, but most often it's a spear. But what's in the other hand right here? It's a set of balances or scales with 2 little, soles in the balances there. Why would there be a scales on the opposite side from the spear of Ophiuchus? You can look right here, is this constellation called Libra. That's the balances. Yeah. So you can see this over and over. So I've just shown you, here's another one. Those balances are kind of small. So for viewers at home, here's one from the 1400s by a artist. His name is Pere Garcia. He lived from 1445 to 1485. He made the balances, the scales really big, but you can see spear on one side, look at Ophiuchus, balances on the other side, Libra, standing on the dragon that he's cast down. Ophiuchus stands on Scorpio. So I've just shown in a very brief amount of time, starting in Genesis, ending in Revelation. Guess what? The whole in between can be shown. Those stories, Moses crossing the Red Sea, can be shown to be based on the stars. And that's not just the Bible. The Greek myths have the same pattern going on. The Norse myths, the myths of the Pacific, of Maui, the myths of the Maya. In fact, I just show one more thing here. Oh yeah, the dragon or the Scorpio sometimes has multiple heads, as I mentioned in that text in Revelation 12, it does. But I put in a Maya. This is from a lintel. It's a beautiful bas-relief carving from Bonampak in Central America. It's a little hard to see, but this is a Maya figure with a spear, and he's wearing a fancy headdress, and it's like a smiting scene that you see in ancient Egypt, which also follow the stars. The artwork of ancient Egypt can be shown to be using this system. You see how that the fallen figure who's about to be speared, just like in the St. Michael scenes, again, this is all the way across the oceans this is a pre-Columbian Maya lintel. Look at that guy. He's got like dreadlocks, just like Scorpio has multiple heads. So enough with that. That just gives a taste, I hope, of the world's ancient sacred stories are using this unified system. And it's incredible. And the evidence is overwhelming. It's really abundant.
Well, as always,
that's all.
Dave, you haven't failed to blow my mind. So that being said, you're triggering me, actually.
Oh dear. Is that good?
About every other sentence, I'm going, so I might have to share a couple of things here.
Please do.
Yes. So we'll look at some ancient architecture. And when we do that, we will, okay, now I have to figure out here, won't take me but a second, we hope. Okay, there it is. All right, so we're looking at a map of France, and what I have done there is I have roughly but fairly accurately marked the positions of the 7 or 8, depending on how you count, cathedrals that were dedicated to the Virgin, and to show that there is a celestial component. So there we have all of the stars, all of the cathedrals. You can see Nantes, Angers, Le Mans, Chartres is part of it. Notre Dame at St. Denis, Reims, Amiens, Bayeux. These are all the great high Gothics, the ones with the huge, very impressive ogival vaults, right? Well, so there's the constellations of Virgo. I mean, the constellation of Virgo, showing the configuration of the stars. And what they've done is they've very much approximated, either intentionally or by accident, the constellation onto the Earth. And then we can then associate
fantastic.
cathedrals, and I haven't done this with all of them, but we can associate cathedrals, specific cathedrals, with specific stars. And so it looks like what they've done here is taken a particular constellation, juxtaposed it onto the landscape, and transposed it into this geographic expression of the stars on the Earth. They've done the same thing at Angkor Thom Complex, Cambodia, which reflects the pattern of the constellation Draco. So what I'm thinking as I listen to you is, now if we look at the various examples of, and Gary David has done some tremendous work documenting the star patterns juxtaposed on the Southwest American landscape, as Robert is well aware of. He's written several books on this. It's showing up that this again was part of a universal system of sacred architecture. And now you have to wonder, to what extent do the temples and these sacred places and the legend associated with them and the traditions associated with them, to what extent do they now correlate with the celestial template? And my instinct, and what I've seen in the preliminary exploration of this subject, is that the entire thing was part of a coordinated system. And that so all the stories that are being preserved in the unchanging backdrop of the fixed stars, to the extent capable, they were projected down onto the sacred landscape. So that is to part of what I think we're doing here, Dave, is getting right down into the inner meaning of the so-called Holy Grail. Because if you immerse yourself into those particular stories, and I would really be interested to see what you've come up with, if you've looked at any of those stories in the context of your celestial template here, because I have no doubt that it is like everything else,
Oh, absolutely.
astronomical in base.
Round tables and holy grails. Obviously, grails appear in the ancient text, well before the Morte Arthur of the 1300s. But I just want to say, what's really amazing is Randall and I did not coordinate or discuss what we were going to. I just put up a picture of Virgo, and then you have the cathedrals. And actually, there are also, I'm sure you're aware, Randall, Michael lines. They're called. The Archangel Michael. And there's other researchers who are really the experts in this, not myself, but there are Michael lines that go out, those Skellig Michael off of the coast of Ireland, which is kind of made famous or popularized in some of those more recent Star Wars movies where the older Luke is on one of these cliff-like islands, Skellig Michael. But there's a line that goes all the way, Mont Saint Michel, these Michael lines, and they have. There's a researcher named Melissa Campbell, I believe, is the one who found that many of these Michael locations are placed there because there's a specific day of the year that has a golden ratio. In other words, the hours of daylight to hours of darkness make a golden proportion where the Michael cathedrals are. Anyway, yes, it's definitely mapped out on the earth, like you said. And not only, like you said, Gary talking about the in the Americas, but Ross Hamilton has done a lot of work on that. Do you know Ross out at the Serpent Mound and at the earthworks? And Randall, Graham and I went out to the summer solstice there at the earthworks one year. I think it was 2017, and met with Ross there.
Okay,
and this is worldwide. And the Psalms in the Bible talk about, we're going to Jerusalem. This is a psalm of ascents, like moving around. The pattern is preserved in song and song and psalm. And this was in Ireland. There's there's a book about how they used to divide up the territory in celestial ways and have choirs that were singing in the four quadrants constantly, and in shifts to keep the song going, to uplift everybody in the culture.
And you mentioned it. It gives me the goosebumps.
It's awesome.
And I'm sure if we got into the origin of the term goosebumps, we'd find something interesting. But we won't go there right now. Speaking of earthworks, I think I'll go ahead and show you this, because it kind of shows another, what I think, aspect, kind of a mostly unexplored aspect, but one which could, again, like so many things, yield fruit. And so here we have the Shiloh Mound complex, which is in Tennessee, and it's laid out a cluster of truncated pyramids with a plaza. Sort of, they're linked around this unifying plaza. And then there was a series of interesting topographic features that the pyramid complex is integrated with. But if we look now on the next slide, what we're seeing here is essentially the ground plan and the layout of the particular complex. And
the Pleiades.
The what?
Is that Pleiades?
What would make you think that, Robert?
I don't know. Looks like Seven Sisters, sort of.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the Pleiades. Tell you what. What's that?
Yeah.
The Pleiades. What do you got?
That's amazing. That's amazing. I haven't seen that Shiloh Mound complex map to the Pleiades before.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of possibilities here. And then we get into all of that, but we won't go there now. We got to save some stuff for the conference.
So come to Sedona. So this is really exciting. I mean, it's like a treasure that, like I said, Aristotle, at least Hamlet's Mill credits Aristotle with saying, this is an ancient treasure. Hamlet's Mill starts off, this is this book from 1969 that Graham Hancock actually writes about a lot, and that's how I got turned on to Hamlet's Mill. And they talk about the dust of century was already piled up on this ancient system by the time the Greeks wandered onto the stage. It's really, really ancient, and it unites the world in this. It ties together. The fact that the stories of the Bible are based on the same system as the stories of the Maya Popol Vuh is
Yeah.
revolutionary. It's just revolutionary. Or the Norse myths are based on the same system as the stories of the Bible, as the stories of ancient Egypt, as the stories, myths from Africa, from the Americas, from Australia, from the Pacific. And I can show that. And I've written a lot of books that show that with diagrams and explanation.
I was going to show you guys a place from Japan that I visited. It's called OU Circle, and I don't know if you can see it very well. There are these big circles. I didn't see good pictures on their site, but this one is a little bit. You can see it. This is from the sky. If you were flying over it and looked down, it would be like two giant eyes looking back up at you. And every time I go look at sacred sites, I always wonder, what does it look like from the sky? Because I think they had communications going both ways for one thing, but the other thing, this circle, I think I think they put down some kind of star map with stones. I can't, I haven't done any specific research on that but that was my first impression from after visiting several sites, and that's in the north part of Japan. And it's just weird. All these stones are stacked up and it looks like they're random, but like when I traveled to Peru, they also, like at this one place, White Rock, outside of Vilcabamba, they carved the whole silhouette of the mountain landscape. So when the full moon was rising, you could see these stones in front of you. You would see the mountains behind the stones. They carved it so perfectly.
It's amazing. In the myths of ancient Japan that are there's a text called the Kojiki, which means the record of ancient matters, and it talks about the creation. Those myths can be shown to be based on the same pattern. There's a god named Hiruko. He's the child of Izanagi and Izanami, the first creator deities, and he's placed into the water in a reed boat, which if you're familiar with, Sunday school classes, you remember that Moses was placed into the water as a baby in a reed basket or in an ark that was sealed with pitch. And these patterns repeat around the world. And what I was going to say about, as you're bringing in the archaeology, Randall and Robert, is there's all this archaeology that's clearly suggests or strongly suggests or compelling, conclusively suggests that there's something about our ancient human history that is completely different from the conventional narrative because it's connected around the world. And the myths come alongside all of that evidence. You've got very compelling, abundant evidence in the myths that there's a connection around the world. But if you go into a conventional college and say, the myths of ancient Japan are connected to the myths of the Maya, are connected to the stories of the Bible, they'll say, get right out of here. That's violating our paradigm of human history. There's clearly something about human history that is much deeper than what we've been told.
And I think that's what makes this conference that we're putting together here so important, because I like to think that it's just going to be the first of many events that help to open the world to this alternate paradigm of our own history and our own reality. And very much, I think there's probably reasons that, entrenched powers would prefer not to upset the established paradigm, because their entire hierarchy of control is built upon a certain worldview taken by the population of the planet as a whole. But if we begin to understand that human history is far deeper than conventional models have recognized, and if we can recognize also that there could be a whole nother order of civilization that doesn't look really anything like our own manifestation of civilized activity and behavior. So because of that, if you talk to these academics about, an ancient civilization and ancient culture, then they're immediately projecting their picture of what our particular manifestation of civilization would look like transplanted. And because of the fact that they're very different, they're based upon two different realities of the universe that we inhabit. And so they don't recognize the specific, they're looking for artifacts. They're looking for pieces of the pottery shards, things like that. And they're not going to find that, because this was something on a different order. And I don't even know where it's going to go when we start getting into it on a deeper level. But that's why I think of deep history. Deep history is what goes back. I mean, conventional history goes back 5,000 years. Deep history could go back 250,000 years. I mean, we're looking at modern humans now, and I never get tired of saying this, reminding people, we modern humans have left our traces on this planet in terms of hard evidence like skeletal remains, pushing back to nearly 200,000 years at this point. And we don't know where the bottom end of that is, right? So you've got to imagine, okay, look, we created this extraordinary civilization that is now engirdling the entire planet, right? And linked up. I mean, we're venturing into space, we're venturing into the cosmos, we've electronically linked the whole planet. And look, when my grandparents were born, when they were born, the primary mode of transportation on the earth was foot, horseback, mule. Now look where we're at. Now take a century or two of our own modern progress as an example. How easily could a millennia or two of who knows what that could have organically appeared on the planet, how easily that might have been lost when you're looking at dozens and dozens of millennia. Actually, when you're looking at a couple of hundred millennia. I mean, you might have, and Dave, as you well know, the ancient traditions all talk about the ancient registers, the sacred history that goes way back, right? Is that just out of a vacuum? Are we to assume that many of these cultures around the world all had these traditions of a much deeper, more ancient tradition of the ancestors, of the gods, however you want to depict them or portray them? But all of that is just the conjuring up of
just made up. Yeah.
Just made up. Yeah.
Coincidentally around the world, just made up.
Just made up.
And I'll throw this in too. The amazing thing, people often ask me, well, where do these myths come from? Well, the system that I'm talking about that can be shown to be the same system around the world, and it's a sophisticated system, it's a profound system, is already present in the earliest texts of the pyramid texts. They're talking about Osiris and Horus, and that whole story follows the same pattern. And it's already present in the Sumerian texts of Gilgamesh, or Sumerian Bilgamesh, and Inanna, the goddess who goes down to the underworld, can be shown to be using the same system in the most ancient Mesopotamian texts, and the most ancient Vedas are using it from ancient India in the Sanskrit epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana. So it's already present in the most ancient civilizations we know, in its kind of fully formed, it's like it's already there. Just like John Anthony West talks about, the hieroglyphs, they're already there, poof.
Right.
In beautiful form. It's not like they evolved. Same thing with this myth system is already in the Americas and in Australia, a very ancient culture of nations and peoples, the indigenous Australians stretching back tens of thousands of years, 40,000 years, and their stories reflect this pattern. Egypt already has it. So where did it come from? It must be well before Egypt, India, China,
I
Australia.
mean, what's the
even.
alternative? Did everybody essentially invents this? Hey, right around the same epoch around the planet, they invent this, and it just also happens coincidentally that it all fits together in a seamless, coherent whole. No, I think that the conclusion you have to draw is that they inherited something from much more ancient than themselves.
And that there was a catastrophe like you talk about, and like Graham talks about, and like Robert Schoch
Yes,
talks about. There was some kind of catastrophe, and those most ancient cultures they're picking up the pieces,
picking up the pieces.
and they've got more than we do today because there's been subsequent
Yes,
subsequent power plays to obscure it from us. So the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Maya were closer to it than we are, but even they may not have known the original system. All they were preserving as much as they could of whatever fragments were left after this
yes.
comet, solar flare, catastrophe, combination, whatever it was.
I lean towards a combination, and I will be explaining that in more detail at the conference. But yes, so we're also with George Howard going to be at the conference. You know, George Howard created the Cosmic Tusk website, and he is a world authority on the great world transforming events that occurred at the Younger Dryas. And he'll be there with Graham Hancock, and of course Graham has theorized about the Younger Dryas and this idea that the Younger Dryas is sort of like the dividing line of human history on this planet. And our challenge is to we have to understand those events, those extraordinary, almost inexplicable events that happened over a period of just a couple of thousand years of the Younger Dryas that completely altered planetary history, So by inference had to have altered human history. And in fact, what we realize now is that the human population probably was decimated to very low numbers and then had to recover. And the genetic evidence is now coming out for a pattern of survivors that are widely dispersed over the planet. And that's going to be a big part of the subject matter of what we dive into here, because to me, looking at this whole cosmic framework and how these events have played out through the recent history of our planet is key to understanding our own past. Because I think what could emerge from this is the realization that we're carrying some kind of a genetic trauma in our memories. And until we work this out and come to terms and recover those memories that have been suppressed, we're not going to be able to affect the kind of universal healing that's required. And this is why, we're using the Holy Grail as kind of the theme for this conference, because the Holy Grail, interestingly, was part of this whole amazing historical phenomena of the late 12th and early 13th centuries that saw the building of the great Gothic cathedrals, the first schools of Kabbalah, the emergence of the Tarot deck, which is a very powerful compilation of ancient symbols, the Templars, the Cathars, the rise of Freemasonry, the troubadours. The list goes on. The amazing architecture that was appearing multiple places around the planet, all within a short period, a century and a half of incredible creative ferment. You had the classical Maya in Central America. You had at the same time as the Gothic cathedrals, and at the same time as some of the great temples like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, which I flashed up there briefly, showing you that Angkor Thom reflected the constellation of Draco in the heavens. Now, there's so much now that can be researched and studied and learned that we haven't really accessed yet, because I think we're just in the infancy of understanding this lost history, this deep history. But yes, the Younger Dryas and the cosmic catastrophe, absolutely, yes, critical part. And we have to understand that to understand the other part of the equation. We have to understand the destruction as well as the creative aspects. And so the idea that we're going to be bringing the symbol of the Grail, you see, the Grail in the stories is not only the thing that creates the wasteland, it's also the thing that heals the wasteland. So the Grail, in one of its manifestation, one of its incarnations, absolutely is the comet. It makes it very clear in the narratives themselves. It's a comet. and the comet and what that comet, the role that that comet played in our ancient history and so on. Well, the comet that causes the whole hierarchical kinds of destructions that take place from geomagnetic field incursion, volcanism, major changes in climate, major changes in the distribution of biota around the planet, and so on and so forth. The comet is the thing that can trigger all of that. And the journeys of those comets that are tracked against the backdrop of the fixed stars, I'm absolutely convinced plays a role in this greater cosmological model that's emerging, and that you're doing so much to help resurrect from the past. But so at the conference, we'll be diving into some of the cutting edge research about the great shift that occurred, the great transformation that occurred at the end of the last ice age, at the dawning of the modern world epoch. We're going to be talking about that. And then we're going to be talking about how we can take this knowledge, this information, to create a new paradigm of civilization on this earth. What can we learn from our ancestors, our predecessors and forebears, how they did it? What were their successes? What were their failures? What can we learn that would possibly be of relevance? Because I can't help but look around the world today and say, yeah, we need something. We need some kind of antidote to the chaos and the division and the enmity that's going on between individuals, between tribes, between nations. There must be a healing that occurs. And then we have to remember, you quoted from the book of Revelation, the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. And I think that's going to be part of what the thing that we're trying to do here by gathering together this network of researchers and thinkers, forward thinkers, who are also forward because they're looking into the past to try to recover that lost history. So that's kind of, I think, the motive of what this conference is about. And I think it's going to be exciting because I'm hoping it's just the harbinger of many things to come, and that we can really plant the seeds of this new paradigm and begin to water it and see it grow during our lifetimes.
That's fantastic. I mean, that was this has just been a fantastic conversation. And I mean, the whole thing, I know.
Well, we'll have to have some conversations like
yeah,
this.
This is
in
great.
Sedona.
Great interaction, because, you know, no two individuals, I'm convinced, agree 100% on every single thing, but it's those frictions, you know, that throw off sparks, and you know, Randall's looking in a different direction than I'm looking. And when you get those two kind of things together, you know, any two researchers or three people or four people, then it's like more will arise than the sum of the parts. And there's myths about that too, when the Norse gods all get together and they all spit into a cauldron, and then this wisdom being arises out, named, you know, this being of wisdom arises out from the spit of all the gods, like mixing together. It's like the focus, actually the myths can be shown to be about healing trauma, and my focus is you can see it throughout the myths. I mean, it's very clear, and I could give examples, but I'm focused on that as an individual because we need that in our lives. These ancient stories are talking about you are separated from yourself so deeply that you even suppress the knowledge of that separation. And here are some dramatizations to point you towards recovery of that, because when you put that into harmony, then it tends to bubble out. When you're separated from yourself, you're going to be separated from other people, from nature. Yeah. Yep. And so I look at it like on the individual level, but it fractals out into society. The exact same psychological patterns happen throughout society, and in the, you know, the gods are all acting out those same types of, you know, internal conflicts that we've got going on. So it's happening in the invisible realm too, if you believe that there is such a thing, which I do. Yeah.
And I think we can see now, it's clear that the kind of psychic traumas that can affect an individual can also affect a culture, can affect us collectively.
That's right.
But collectively, our species is carrying some imprints. And I think it's time now that we really come to understand the source of that sort of disharmony within our collective soul. And it manifests directly as a disharmony in the elements of creation. And there's so much more we could say about this. And that's, of course, the point of this whole conference coming up. And it's very auspicious that it happens on, it's being launched on Easter weekend, because Easter weekend, of course, is, carrying over a component of the ancient myth about death and resurrection, whether it's the death and resurrection of nature after winter, whether it's the death and resurrection of the king from, the illness that has rendered him sick, or whether it's the resurrection of the wasteland, which again was the Grail was the cure for, or the resurrection of the entire planet in the aftermath of a catastrophe. I mean, it applies to all of those things. And so we all remember, hopefully, that that in the stories of the Grail, you remember Crétin des Trois story specifically talks about Joseph of Arimathea collecting the royal blood as he's removing the corpse of Jesus from the cross. And of course, that's a retelling of a much more ancient tale that you can find reflected, for example, in the Norse mythology, with the death and resurrection of Odin. You know that there are many universal correlations there. It's an archetype. It's a universal archetype that was given a specific kind of expression suitable for the age of Pisces, in which that particular story was given unto the world, because the vernal equinox is moving into the star pattern of Pisces, right? And so all of these things are intermingled, but the transference of the royal blood, the holy blood, that was a symbol for something that perhaps potentially could be revitalization to the human species, because we've fallen into the pit, so to speak. We've succumbed to the curse that the Bible talks about. And we're all these ancient cultures give us this backdrop, this metaphor of paradise. And we don't necessarily have to take that 100% literally, but I think we can take it to some degree literally, that there have been times when harmony has prevailed, and then something caused the disruption of that harmony. So all of this paradigm shift that we're talking about is the recovery of this lost knowledge, this lost insight, this lost wisdom or science, the lost science. And the Grail, I take as being the supreme repository of that ancient knowledge. And so the Grail, associated with the idea of spring and resurrection, Easter, it all is fitting together for this conference. I think the cosmic timing is auspicious for this. And so I really hope that people can make it there. I know the traveling is a little more difficult now. And if you can't, we're going to record the entire thing, except we obviously cannot, it won't be the same watching live stream with Dave's stuff, but everything else we're going to be recorded. You can purchase the live stream, and if you actually make it, right? Am I right, Robert? If you make it to one of the 2 weekends, you're going to get the live stream of both weekends, the record.
You get the digital recording of both weekends. Yeah. So you'll be able to go back and review both weekends, even if you only made it to one.
Right. So the first weekend is with Graham, Hancock, and Randall over Easter.
George Howard will be here.
George Howard, the first weekend. And the second weekend, I'll be there, the weekend of Earth Day weekend.
Yes.
And there'll be Hopi and Navajo Nation, or Hopi and Zuni Nation representatives there, and Sound Healing Tribe from Sedona is going to be there. But if you come to weekend 2, for instance, with me, you'll still get to see the video from weekend 1 with Graham and Randall. And if you come to weekend 1 with Graham and Randall, you still get to see the video from weekend 2 with me. And then in between, there's a road trip opportunity for people who want to do that, where you're going out to some painted rock and pictograph sites in the desert.
Yeah, we're going to be going up to Hopi to meet with Bertram. He's with the Corn Clan, which also ties in the Earth Day weekend plans we have, where Bertram and Clive are going to be bringing corn seeds, blue corn seeds, to give to everybody who participates to grow their own corn, which they refer to as the seeds of life. which are interesting, you know, that one design in the middle of the flower of life is called the seed of life. And then you have different geometries, the flower of life, the fruit of life, the tree of life. So I thought it was pretty interesting that I said, well, you're going to talk on the blue corns and mythologies. What do I title that? And he goes, oh, the seeds of life. I was like, wow, it's all so connected, you know, it's really amazing. Yeah, so they'll be there, the Pueblo brothers, I'm calling them. Bertram's from Hopi and Clive is from Zuni. And they'll be able to share the mythology stories too, you know, the flood stories and some of that stuff. And I'm sure they're going to be fascinated with the star stories because they're so into the star systems and how it's all connected, and they're constantly making reference to it, even though sometimes it seems like they may not know what it is exactly they're referencing, but they know they're supposed to continue the memory, if you know what I mean.
Mhm. So,
No, it's gonna be great.
and you might mention Ryan Scherzinger of there. He's going to be talking about his work with
Right.
establishing wellness-oriented communities. Spencer Taylor will be there who's just putting the wraps on his 7-year effort documentary on education, the status of education. And that's going to be part of the theme too, is how important it is to begin to expose children and young people to these concepts and these ideas, and perhaps triggering a renaissance in how we educate our children, and how important it's going to be to do so. Clearly, I think the prevailing modes of education aren't working. And we need something that not only inculcates the ability to think critically and logically, but also inspires on a grand level of how truly wonderful and miraculous this situation, this world actually is. Too much is being taken for granted. And very much, we're going to be talking about the establishment of the launching of a project, which I'm going to call the Sanctuary Project. I'll be explaining why at the conference. But the idea is taking the pieces, the remnants of what we've inherited, and try to re-engineer the system, reconnect the dots, and see how we might take that and transpose that to our own 21st century circumstance here on the planet, to the benefit of everything, to our society, our civilization, our planet as a whole. So that's going to be also part of what we're going to be doing at this conference, is talking about taking this thing to the next step and actually laying down a cornerstone, which will be perhaps the beginning of our epoch of cathedral building, when we all come together around a work, an inspiring, uplifting work that to the glories of creation.
Hey, they don't have any rocks that look like cathedrals in Sedona anywhere, do they, Robert? I don't know. They have any, like, cathedral rocks out there?
Yeah, they do have a cathedral rock.
Yeah,
You know that.
pretty spectacular. This
Yeah.
such a spectacular place. I have not been there since I was pretty young, so I'm really
well.
looking forward to getting back to Sedona. So
I'm-
thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this awesome event, Randall and
Yeah.
Robert.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
you're part of-
it was my idea. Robert resisted.
I
had
know. I
I
didn't
had to
want to
beat
say.
through his resistance.
I know. Well, thank you, Randall,
No,
for
I
for
make- I
standing
make
up for
fun.
that.
I make it funny. No, I think, did I suggest that we get Dave?
I think I was suggesting that we needed some other people for Earth Day weekend,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and then you brought up Dave, and I said, yeah, that would be a good idea. Star lore, mythology. I think all these things are very important. I studied theology, Dave, and I didn't have an outlet to go to because we were studying ancient culture, Samaria, Babylon, all these, but it didn't go along with the church, so to speak. And so I really enjoy having these outlets to really explore beyond the boundaries and the dogma of just believe this way or just believe that way. Well, tell me why.
Yeah, it's a big subject, but I can show with very abundant, compelling, and I'd say conclusive evidence that the stories in the Bible are using the exact same system as those stories of ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, and they are talking about the same things. Randall was talking very eloquently about the Grail and its meaning. There's destruction, there's renewal. The Easter message can also be understood to be about the suppression of self, that we have all buried this higher self. Think of how many myths around the world have twins. This is the easiest way to show it to me that really kind of hits home. There are twins in the stories of the Maya. There are twins in the Bible all over the place, both Old and New. There's twins, of course, in the Greek myths. There's twins in the Mahabharata of ancient India and other places. Those twins are not two different people. It's not two people. It's talking about, it's usually a divine twin and a mortal twin, like Castor and Pollux. It's recovery of, you have access to a divine self that you've suppressed and pushed down, like Jesus into the tomb. Jesus goes around healing people. You have a higher self that can actually heal those traumas. And this is what cutting edge psychologists today are talking about. I'm talking about like Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Richard Schwartz, that have been dealing with thousands of men and women who have addictions and all these other issues of modern life. And they're saying the real heart of this problem is separation from self. And self actually knows how to heal. Just like the Jesus figure goes around healing anyone he comes into contact with. That's a picture of self, but you've suppressed it. You've buried it. And yet it's just waiting to come back. Yourself is there just waiting to come back.
The restoration of wholeness.
That's right.
Of wholeness.
That's right.
And
so there's fantastic resonances with on societal level and individual level, and it goes all the way back. The ancients were talking about it, which gives me hope. Like, well, it must not just be a modern problem. This must be an issue with like human existence. We have to have that renewal that you talked about, Randall.
Well, and I think that we're kind of looking in a sense that we're seeing the final implications of taking this modern obsolete paradigm out to its final conclusion, which I think we see. Look what's happening in terms of the polarity, the division on the planetary scale. And now we've got two superpowers with roughly 5,000 to 6,000 nuclear weapons poised at each other. And if there was ever a time for a restoration of wholeness and a healing of that, which is dividing us, on so many levels, it's now. Because if we don't begin to change course here, our future could start looking rather bleak. And that's a reality I think we're all going to have to face as spiritually mature beings. And that is what really is, to me, kind of incentivizing a sense of kind of urgency, that this is a work that we can't be procrastinating any longer on this work. It needs to go forward now.
Yeah.
Really well said. Really well said. So fantastic, fantastic conversation. I'm really glad we captured this, Robert. I think, frankly, this whole thing, it's like, what have we been going? Just over an hour. It's like a little podcast all by itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Even without editing it, I think the whole thing would be really interesting to people. And I can't imagine anyone watching that whole thing and not wanting to come join us. I hope everyone who can, I know not everyone's able to come, and then we've got the video, but I really hope to see everyone there.
Yeah. All right. So Robert, it's in your hands now.